The U.S. competition with the Soviet Union for technological dominance spurred the U.S. on the first ever landing on the moon. The space race is on as the USSR are the first to put a satellite in space.
President Kennedy has addressed his opinion on this event.
We meet in an hour of change and challenge, in a decade of hope and fear, in an age of both knowledge and ignorance. The greater our knowledge increases, the greater our ignorance unfolds. No man can fully grasp how far and how fast we have come. But condense, if you will, the 50,000 years of man's recorded history in a time span of but a half a century. Stated in these terms, we know very little about the first 40 years, except at the end of them, advanced man had learned to use the skins of animals to cover them. Then about 10 years ago, under this standard, man emerged from his caves to construct other kinds of shelter. Only 5 years ago, man learned to write and use a cart with wheels. Christianity began less than 2 years ago. The printing press came this year. And then less than 2 months ago, during this whole 50-year span of human history, the steam engine provided a new source of power. Newton explored the meaning of gravity. Last month, electric lights and telephones and automobiles and airplanes became available. Only last week did we develop penicillin and television and nuclear power. This is a breathtaking pace, and such a pace cannot help but create new ills as it dispels old. So it is not surprising that some would have us stay where we are a little longer, to rest, to wait. If this capsule history of our progress teaches us anything, it is that man in his quest for knowledge and progress is determined and cannot be deterred. We shall send to the moon, 240,000 miles away, a giant rocket more than 300 feet tall on an untried mission to an unknown celestial body, and then return it safely to Earth. But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why 35 years ago fly the Atlantic? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone. And therefore, as we set sail, we ask God's blessing on the most hazardous and dangerous and greatest adventure on which man has ever embarked.
The Russians are getting ahead of the U.S. by putting a map.
This is Movietone. Jeffrey Sumner reporting. The Earth looked a delicate blue floating in a black sky. So said the first man in space after his fabulous journey of 108 minutes, Major Yuri Gagarin, a 27-year-old Soviet Air Force officer whose name will live in history. Tracking Russian progress stage by stage, the Jodrell Bank radio telescope has been directed by Professor Sir Bernard Lovell.
I think that this Russian achievement of landing an astronaut safely after orbiting the Earth is really one of the greatest events in the history of mankind. The Russians have succeeded in breaking the barrier which binds man to Earth, and the path is now open for them to explore the solar system. It's remarkable that this great feat has been achieved by a nation which a generation ago was largely illiterate. And I think it's an amazing example of what can be achieved by singleness of purpose, coupled with a very great investment in education and research. It's a lesson which the peoples of the West will continue to disregard at their peril.
Britain's reaction has been one of admiration, coupled with speculation as to the next phase of space travel.
I think that quite soon we shall see that the Russians have the rocket capability of making a soft landing of instruments on the lunar surface. And in a few years' time, this technique will be coupled with the astronautical technique, and they will put into orbit around the moon a human being. And I believe that in the next 5 or 7 years, the Russians will fulfill their 7-year plan for science, in which they intend to make a landing of a human being on the moon.
Man is reaching for the stars.
News. NASA is transmitting images of what appears to be a moon landing.
I'm going to step off the limb now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Columbia, this is Houston, AOS, over.
Houston, Columbia, on the high gain, over.
Roger, the EVA is progressing beautifully. They're setting up the flag now. I guess you're about the only person around that doesn't have TV coverage of the scene.
That's all right, I don't mind a bit.
They've got the flag up now, and you can see the stars and stripes on the lunar
Flag
surface.
up now, and you can see the stars and
Are you getting a TV picture now, Houston? Neil, yes, we are getting a TV picture. You're in our field of view now.
I'd like to evaluate the various paces that a person can traveling on the lunar surface. You do have to be. All right, you do have to be rather careful to keep track of where your center of mass is. Sometimes it takes about 2 or 3 paces to make sure that you've got your feet underneath you. And about 2 or 3 or maybe 4 easy paces can bring you to a fairly smooth stop. Like a football player, you just have to put out to the side,